Aragón y Carlos Sánchez.
Muy buenos días, muy buenas tardes, muy buenas noches a todos y sobre todo, feliz 2026. Esta es la primera entrevista del año, no había tenido oportunidad de felicitaros todavía desde el anterior grupo de control. Y bueno, hoy estoy realmente muy contento, yo vuelvo por mis fueros, ya sabéis que sigo investigando todo esto que yo llamo la fábrica de plagas. Ahora mismo vivimos en un momento en el que, bueno, pues se están sacrificando cerdos, se están sacrificando aves, gallinas ponedoras, en una situación, bueno, pues que encuentra muchas similitudes con lo que pasó en 2020, con esa pandemia a priori zoonótica, que, bueno, pues de repente los países empezaron a cerrar negocios, a cerrar la vida civil, básicamente, a restringir toda suerte de derechos y libertades. Y bueno, pues nos decía que básicamente nos vendieron aquello como una suerte de cataclismo natural, ¿no? Una catástrofe natural. Y luego investigando, rascando por aquí, rascando por allá, pues uno se va dando cuenta que no había, que realmente la cosa estaba más planeada de lo que parecía a priori, que había muchos intereses en juego detrás, todo este complejo llamado One Health, ¿no? Que pretende, bueno, pues que la salud de los ecosistemas, la salud de los animales, la salud del planeta, nuestra salud está todo relacionado. Y bueno, pues bajo ese paraguas aparentemente pues filantrópico, benefactor, se esconde un montón de, bueno, pues de intereses, toda una industria científica de fabricación de patógenos, fabricación de plagas, al final, ¿no? Y bueno, pues ya habéis leído varios de mis artículos, supongo algunos, los que estáis viendo esta entrevista. Y hoy tengo la suerte de entrevistar a un investigador que ha viajado mucho por el mundo y, bueno, pues que encontró en este asunto también una obsesión recurrente como la mía, solo que él ha llegado más profundamente a ciertas convicciones, ciertas certezas que ha plasmado en este libro que veis aquí. Él es Jim Haslam y ha publicado este libro que podéis leer gratis en Amazon Kindle. También lo podéis comprar, no está traducido al castellano de momento, pero bueno, los que habléis bien inglés y tengáis interés, el libro es verdaderamente apasionante y se llama COVID-19 Mystery Solved, Misterio Resuelto. It leaked from a Wuhan lab, se escapó de un laboratorio de Wuhan, pero no es una basura china, Chinese junk. Es muy interesante el libro, está lleno de referencias y, bueno, pretende demostrar, cerrar de una vez por todas este asunto de la fuga de laboratorio y tiene unas teorías bastante interesantes que yo no había contemplado y que para mí son bastante novedosas y bueno, pues vamos a hablar de todas ellas. Quienes tengáis interés en ir abriendo boca, Jim Haslam tiene también un Substack que se llama Reverse Engineering, The Origin of SARS-CoV-2, donde podéis también leer, bueno, pues una versión más resumida de su trabajo y es verdaderamente también muy interesante. Está en Substack, lo podéis buscar, os lo voy a compartir aquí para que lo veáis ahora. Este blog tiene, bueno, pues un montón. Lo que ha escrito básicamente en el libro está recopilado todo en un mismo texto, pero aquí podéis ver, bueno, pues todos los artículos que ha escrito al respecto desde hace ya bastante tiempo y ciertamente para mí ha sido muy revelador lo que he encontrado ahí. Así que ya sin más preámbulos os voy a presentar a Jim Haslam. Jim Haslam, how are you?
Good, thanks for having me, Carlos.
It's such a pleasure. Yours is the first interview I do this year, so you can say happy New Year, happy 2026 for everyone, happy 2026 for you as well. And yeah, it's a pleasure to have you here. I was telling to my audience that about your book, on which you can find everything like explained in detail. But this other article, there's one article that is very interesting, on which you do like you summarize mostly what you wrote in this book, which is this one. It's a very interesting one. The most plausible origin of SARS-CoV-2. Let's use this article of yours as a guide for the interview, because I think that summarizes very good. First question of all, how many countries have you lived in?
Born and raised here in America, born and raised in Texas, but where have I lived? The UK for 6 months, Southeast Asia for 3 months. That's really about it for me as far as international travel. And then I probably lived abroad, at least out of a suitcase, for, I don't know, 6 months out of the year for 6 years of my career. So I do have an international flavor. I'm not a complete redneck down here in America. So I do bring that perspective to this lab leak debate, which is, I guess, part of the reason why I was interested in it, to be honest with you, Carlos. It's an international, espionage story, if you will. It's like, who the heck did this thing? So that was part of my thinking behind this. And it's truly an international research project gone astray.
Yeah.
That's basically the way everyone's involved. I mean, you'll find Spanish scientists, you'll find American scientists, Dutch scientists to be specific, Ralph Barrick to be specific, an Australian one, an Asian one. So, I mean, it includes everyone as far as I'm concerned. It's an international project. It's an international collaboration gone sideways in Wuhan.
Okay, and in all this journey of yours, researching on this, which is like tricky topic. Who were your best allies on this research?
Most of them are anonymous. I don't even know their name. They were just random people like me online, mainly Twitter, and they were digging up stuff, and I was reading what they wrote. A bunch of them, were probably professional scientists using an alias, so I'll never know who they are. One of them was over there, I believe, somewhere in Turkey. He was one of my friends early in the fight when I split from fellow lab leakers. So just to summarize it, I am a lab leaker, someone that's spent a dumb amount of time online debating the origins of lab leak. But I'm different than your typical lab leaker. Your typical lab leaker believes Xi Zhengli and the Wuhan Institute of Virology did something in the Wuhan BSL-2, and she was playing with fire in something that she should have been in the BSL-4. And I contend, she is not the villain. She is not the creator. She is actually a whistleblower. She is innocent. I believe she has provided evidence that proves SARS-CoV-2 was engineered. So that's kind of where I start off that letter to the World Health Organization. That thing was submitted by myself and Jeffrey Sachs to the World Health Organization this summer. I guess it was around May of 2025. So and they responded. I was pretty impressed. The World Health Organization responded to us, to me, to that letter. So it's a good summary. It's a bit inside the weeds towards the end, but at the beginning, I basically lay out that if a virus is engineered, that's the first line, wherever it spilled over into the human population, for example, Wuhan does not tell us where it was engineered. And I contend COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, was created in U.S. labs on U.S. soil in 2019, and it was then shipped to the Wuhan Institute of Virology for testing, where it got out accidentally. But I do contend it was created with intent on U.S. soil in U.S. labs as an animal vaccine, not a human vaccine. That's a big difference. It was an animal vaccine. So it's a bit wicked. It's a bit wild when it got set free on us humans. So it really wasn't well adapted to us. Well, it was pretty well adapted to us, but it was well adapted to a mammalian species. In particular, they were trying to vaccinate bats. So you're old enough to probably remember SARS. SARS was, 2003 out of the Hong Kong area. It spread all over Europe, and it didn't even come to North America. It came to Canada, but that was a big deal for U.S. troops over there in the Southeast Asia region. And SARS was a killer. So the idea was to vaccinate bats against SARS-like pathogens. MERS is another one. Rabies is another one. All these nasty pathogens, Marburg, you've heard about. They usually come from bats. Yeah. And so they were in there in that Wuhan Institute of Virology vaccinating bats. And so I contend, actually, that it wasn't a Chinese scientist that was the first patient zero or the spillover event where it occurred. It was an Australian named Danielle Anderson. I'm not blaming her for the pandemic. This thing was made to spread. It was aerosolized. It was made transmissible. It was designed with intent, with purpose. It was designed to transmit, to spread. It's a self-spreading vaccine. And this idea, was not Danielle Anderson's in Australia. It kind of, I told you before we went on air, it started off with a Spanish scientist, some 20 years ago when he was out there vaccinating rabbits on some island, little tiny island in the Mediterranean. So it was
in Menorca, exactly. So let me show this article that you're just mentioning, because it's very interesting, and it brings us to the memory of some of the scientists that are actually involved in the actual outbreak of African swine fever and also the avian flu as well, right? And your point of view is that the actual virus, it wasn't like a real virus, but a vaccine to vaccinate nature, let's say. So this connects with the actual plans of, we were just speaking about it out of the camera, but this connects with the actual plans to vaccinate pigs in the wild, right? Which is, well, in terms of market, in terms of business, is a great business, because you have like the huge nature to vaccinate, so a lot of individual doses of new vaccines. And so your idea was that this SARS-CoV-2 virus was an actual vaccine, was intended to be aerosolized in the caps in a Guangdong. Is it correct?
Yes, one needle goes into one animal, and you just inject that one animal, and then it goes off into the wild, and it breeds or mates or spits on its mate. Then the virus is basically spreading, but it's more of a vaccine. The vaccine is spreading like a virus. It's really dual use in nature. So essentially, you've gone out there, you just had to vaccinate one animal. Otherwise, you had to go out there and individually vaccinate these wild animals, our domestic animals on your farm, and that's pretty labor intensive to go out there with individual needles for individual animals out there. So the idea is you just stick one needle into one animal, and then it spreads autonomously through the air, through the breath, through their mouth, pig to pig, mouth to mouth, person to person. And it goes out there and it spreads autonomously. And it was an idea that started in Spain with this guy right here, Jose. What is his name? I can't even
Jose Maria Sanchez Vizcaino.
Yeah, that's him. He is the godfather of this idea of a transmissible recombinant vaccine. In this case, he was vaccinating rabbits against, I can't even pronounce that,
myxomatosis
disease. Thank you.
Yeah,
and the idea was that he would go out there. It was an attenuated vaccine, if I remember the details of sorts. And he just injected one animal, one rabbit, on this one tiny island off the coast of Menorca, out there in the Mediterranean. Yes. And it worked. Not as efficiently as he hoped. It was something like 20, 30, 40%, inoculation rate. But that was where this idea started with. It's basically a virus that's been modified to act like a vaccine and to deliver an antigen, antibodies, into this case, rabbits on an island. So this is a big disease, I guess, over there in mainland Europe, and he was working on it. And I believe,
well, it also affects to cats. Myxomatosis is the typical.
Oh, really?
It's the typical virus that affects cats as well. Domestic cats especially. So it's a big deal. And then the thing is, we started to vaccinate nature, and now we have the same kind of projects. So it looks like, well, when you start to dig on this laboratory businesses. You find out that they're doing things, but how can they cover in the end their own actions? Like by telling everyone that it's like a natural catastrophe. This is the whole thing. They're trying to avoid our sight into this thing, and they keep on doing it. Very, very. Very good. So do you think that someone is going to be held accountable for all that happens?
No, they're going to get away with it. That's the only thing I'm sure about. They're all going to get away with it. I name names in the book, and I'll name them here. The guy that created the genome was Ralph Baric. He's the professor at the University of North Carolina. It's his baby. It's his pieta. He's been working on it for his whole career, and he's 70 years old now. And once you know what to look for, Ralph Baric, the University of North Carolina, this coronavirus expert on the U.S. government payroll, more or less, who has a huge lab in North Carolina, essentially was showing off the SARS-2 genome in 2014 gain-of-function conferences. So you have to know what to look for. He doesn't call it SARS-2 back then, but he's not creating this thing with intent to infect us, humans. It was an animal vaccine, an idea that basically was long in the making. When you look at these virologists like him, they're not really scientists in the traditional sense. They're more like, I like to think of them as veterinarians. They basically perfected their trade on animals, and particularly animals they use in the lab. And so that was the giveaway that someone in my mind had created this thing on US soil and US labs, because this virus we call SARS-CoV-2 was not transmitting or infecting any Chinese animals. There's 0 Chinese animals that have shown infection and transmission. So that's what I was looking for, essentially. I'm not a virologist, not a biologist, mechanical engineer. I'm more interested in aerosolized agents. And that was essentially, how does this thing transmit through the air and what animals does it transmit through? And this is a 3 to 4 year old news story for me that I'm just now trying to get out. And I had to write a book to do it. So thanks for the time. But when you look at the transmission models of SARS-CoV-2, there's only 5 mammals on this planet outside of us humans that transmit SARS-CoV-2. The first one was over there in Europe. It was the American mink. You remember the mink outbreak on the Denmark and Netherlands farms?
True.
When you lived there, you would have
True.
noticed that. That was the
True.
first sign something's funny, because there's no American mink in China. This is that dark little ferret thing that they used to make mink coats. And it was a big mink industry, essentially. And they pretty much slaughtered every single one of them. All these mink farms are now gone because there was an outbreak of SARS-CoV-2 in the mink farms. And that was the first clue that I myself missed at first. But that was the first clue something's wrong. So this virus, SARS-CoV-2, has seen the snout, the nose, the ACE2 receptor of the mink before, it emerged in Wuhan. So someone in some lab had used mink. That's basically the picture you see of like the Ron Fouchier types in the Netherlands, where they put two animals together. They look like mink, but they're actually ferrets. And they have them separated in a cage, and they're training the pathogen to go from one mink to the next through air. And they're training the pathogen to get airborne and transmissible. They're creating an animal vaccine, or in this case, gain of function in the traditional sense. It's just turbocharged to another extent. The next animal that was kind of funny was the American deer. I'm like, what the heck is COVID from Wuhan doing in American deer? Well, American scientists use American deer to model and create self-spreading vaccines. The next one was called the American deer mouse. It's like this little rat, basically. No relation to deer, but it kind of looks like one. It's a tiny little rat, most abundant species in North America. What are they used for? Oh, self-spreading vaccines. Then there's another one called a Syrian hamster. That's that pet you had as a kid, or your kid has as kids. This little furry animal that runs around in a globe, a little gerbil-like thing. And it was used for self-spreading vaccines to aerosolize agents. And then the fifth one was the Egyptian fruit bats. And that's what tied it into the DARPA program. And that's where I was able to triangulate this creator that took Ralph Barrick's SARS-CoV-2 genome from North Carolina. And he's in Montana. And his name is Vincent Munster. And he's Dutch. He is the protege of Ron Fouchier, the guy that, if you don't have to look very far, know much about gain of function.
The guy who actually created, which is really funny what you're saying, because is the guy who actually created the narrative of the avian flu jumping from birds to humans through minks, isn't it? And there's something that is really, really funny. But the first outbreak in avian flu in Spain was in a mink farm in Spain in 2022. The first avian flu in mammals in Spain was this case. Yeah, well, it is very suspicious because it follows a pattern, right? Like what do they have to do, the minks in the Netherlands and the minks in Spain? Well, here you have the connection. One of the first things that shocked me up when I was reading your work was the character. Let's call it character, not in terms of a tale. The character, the main suspect was Xi Zhengli, as you said, but she published the paper about the RaTJ13, right? That for me at the moment was like a smoking gun somehow, because the genomic coincidence was 97%, something like that, like really close.
Yeah.
So all my research was based on that specific genome. And for you, with the evidence that you've shown in your book, for you, she was trying to break the cover up, like put the elephant in the room, like in the middle of the room for everyone to see it. Can you just explain a bit this point of view of yours?
It's a bit inside baseball. You do get a little bit of it, quite a bit of it, more than most. So I appreciate that, Carlos. It's very counterintuitive, but there's not even a really great analogy I can give that like transcends borders and tells. But I basically say she called the bluff, like she was playing poker, essentially. She put her cards on the table and she says, "This is what I got," and everyone was like, "Oh, you got something 96% similar. That makes you a suspect." But when you look really close at this thing, you realize what she's done. She's published something so close, it makes SARS-CoV-2 look engineered. In fact, it's a 100% match, not a 96%, a 100% match at what's called the spike protein, this little important piece of the genome in the middle. And right at the S1, S2 border, they call it, of the spike protein, is this 100% match of Xizeng Li's RATG13 genome. No one suspected SARS-CoV-2 was engineered on January 10th when it was published. By the way, Lin Wang resigned on January 10th, 2020, and he's the boss.
Which is kind of
Daniel Anderson. Yes.
very suspicious as well.
Yes. So
I mean, this resigning.
You don't have to put two and two together to figure out what's going on there. But no one suspects it's engineered besides Lin Wang and Daniel Anderson on January 10th of 2020 when he stepped down as the director of Duke Nuss. But from January 10th of 2020 till January 24th of 2020, no one suspects it's engineered. You can go onto the virological.org website. It's a forum for virologists, and they're up there like, oh, this thing's great. It's a product of nature. Look at it evolve in real time. We can track it. This is Christian Anderson. This is Bob Gary. These are these characters you read about, heard about in the cover-up. Yes. And they're all believe it's a natural origin because it was designed to look like it came from nature. It was designed to look as if it came from a wet market. It was designed to look as if it came from a Chinese bat. That was a product, not a feature. Ralph Baric has hidden the engineering, not from us lab leakers, but from nature, because he wants closer it looks like if it came from nature or a bat, the more easily it is to infect and transmit as an animal vaccine. So I don't want to make it sound nefarious, but this was high-tech biotech, hence the subtitle of the book. It's not Chinese junk. But anyways, from January 10th to January 24th of 2020, no one suspects SARS-CoV-2 is engineered. Xizeng Li then uploads RATG13, this 96% match, this bat sample from some bat cave called the Moizheng Mine Shaft, 1,000 miles southwest of Wuhan. And no one in the public eye had seen it before. And all of a sudden, the message board on virological.org goes quiet. Christian Anderson, quiet. Bob Gary, quiet. All the international guys over there in Britain, quiet. Eddie Holmes over there in Australia, quiet. They go offline. And only later did we learn what they did. They went into Slack messages, burner phones, and emails, and they had this fierce debate about it being engineered. And on January 31st, this is a week after she's published it, Christian Anderson has done an alignment with SARS-CoV-2, and it doesn't show up well on camera, but all you have to do is you don't have to buy the book. Just look at the back cover, and it shows up right here where I do the alignment, basically, of SARS-CoV-2 over RATG13. And in there is the middle of this gap, this thing called the furin cleavage site, and it's obviously been inserted by some man somewhere at some point in time. And my contention is if you believe Xizeng Li inserted that furin cleavage site and then published RATG13 exposing the furin cleavage site, kickstarting the February 1st cover-up, involving all these international scientists, I think you're not looking at the right suspect. So what she was doing, in my opinion, she said, not my lab. And she's pointing up the road about 15.
Because one of the big differences between the RATG13 and the SARS-CoV-2, which is especially this furin cleavage site, right?
That's the main difference and the only difference.
The main difference. So she was telling, no, my virus, which is actually just a sequence because she couldn't, as I've seen in your work, she couldn't isolate it. So probably because she didn't have the technology to do it in the BSL-2. But well, now when I was reading your work, I can see it really clear because if you read carefully the Fuse project, which is, well, the smoking gun, what they say is they're intending to create a vaccine. So which is not I mean, it's not hiding anywhere. It's right there. So if you follow that, then you understand that, well, Xizeng Li didn't have the capability to create that virus, and also because of the Freedom of Information Acts were released thanks to U.S. right to know. We could read that the Baric wasn't happy at all of creating or working on this virus in the BSL-2, not even the BSL-3. So he wanted a BSL-4 to work on it. So one character is often hide or hid in the narrative is especially this Vincent Munster that you just said. So why do you think it's being so, I don't know, covered during this time? Because Baric is the official suspect, the villain of the whole story. In every single narrative, you find Ralph Baric as the center, so we don't have any controversy on that. But why is Vincent Munster so, hid from the scope?
He's a pathway to the big cheese and Fauci. He is Fauci's personal aerosol specialist. He is Fauci's boy. He is Fauci's friend. They have regular contact. Fauci offered Vincent Munster early tenure in 2016 if he could set up a bat lab and do this kind of risky research. Fauci was visiting Rocky Mountain Lab in Montana in October of 2019. Put up your hat for that. It really wasn't Vincent Munster. It was actually his boss, Heinz Feldman, a German. So these two European scientists in Rocky Mountain Lab, this is a giant BSL-4 facility in the middle of nowhere, Montana, which is Fauci's personal biodefense lab. Have you heard of Fort Detrick? Think of Fort Detrick, but in Montana, and it's Fauci's baby. It's his outpost. He has become the biodefense czar for America and all the world, I guess, where he's going to basically defend, humans against these nasty pathogens that come from these nasty animals. And his idea, this is Fauci's idea, was to vaccinate animals. And he was working on self-spreading vaccines in 2014. So if you think Ralph Barrick's a big guy that leads to like the CIA and Intel and all that, he's kind of, peanuts compared to this Vincent Munster guy. And there's some, interest in Vincent Munster, but I'm pretty much the only one with a few others talking about him on a regular basis. So it's kind of understandable he's flying under the radar. But if as long as you follow the path of how I lay it out, the genome's created by Ralph Barrick, and he ships the genome his technology is so advanced, it fits in a 1 millimeter tube. It ships on dry ice via FedEx or DHL around the world very easily. I mean, this is how advanced.
Wow, that's scary. That's scary.
It is scary. I mean, it is truly scary that, they can just create these genomes literally out of, thin air. They have to have a template, but they can actually create an infectious genome out of, a template. They don't even need the actual, in other words, Shizing Li only needed to upload the RATG13 sequence to the NIH database, which she did in 2018. She uploaded a partial of the RATG13, and someone like Ralph Barrick can download the sequence. The sequence is just numbers, basically letters on paper. And he can take those letters on paper. He does what this called electroporation. He electrocutes it like a Frankenstein virus, brings it to life, basically, in North Carolina. So Ralph Barrick could recreate RATG13 in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, inside of his lab. That's how advanced his technology is. That's where all that USAID predict stuff comes from. People like Shizing Li go out there and Peter Daszak go out there to these caves in Africa and Asia, and they collect these samples, upload them to these databases where Ralph Barrick could create countermeasures. It's a whole biodefense boondoggle going on. But Ralph Barrick would create a countermeasure, a genome that we now know as SARS-CoV-2 as an animal vaccine, ships it to Vincent Munster over there in Hamilton, Montana. And he does what he does, and he aerosolizes agents to make it transmissible. So Ralph Barrick's, inert genome is pretty much worthless without Vincent Munster's handiwork to make it transmissible. Now, to their defense, they weren't looking to infect us humans. I'm not sure what they were thinking, but they created this thing with intent, and they covered it up with intent. On January 10th of 2020, Vincent Munster emails. That's the day the SARS-CoV-2 genome is published, and Linfa Wong steps down. Vincent Munster emails Ralph Barrick, perfect, right between your favorite viruses. It's just the most bizarre email, almost as if to say we're in the clear. This thing's so novel, so new, Ralph. They can't even trace it back to us. And look at those idiots. They're over there barking down Shizing Li's neck as if she's the one that did this. So
especially because Barrick also was the creator of this no-see type of technology on which you can just hide the trace of any engineering on any chimeric type of viruses, right? So, you have the ability to hide your own work. You have all the sequences. I mean, it looks like you've been very, very busy lately. Look, can you, because I think this is a key point of your work, which is the difference between the self-spreading vaccines and the self-disseminating type of vaccines and the other technology, right? Because it looks like the diffuse grant wasn't accepted, not because of it being a risky thing, but because it was more expensive or less efficient. Is it?
Yeah, you get it. You do get it, Carlos. Yeah. Thanks for reading. Thanks for understanding. What Ralph Barrick proposed and Peter Daszak of EcoHealth Alliance proposed and Shizing Li and Linfa Wong proposed and DARPA Diffuse was technically safe. It's not transmissible. What they were going to do is just spray the bats as they entered and exit the cave. And it was, it sounds crazy because it is crazy, don't get me wrong, but it's technically not a transmissible agent. They weren't going to make it a transmissible agent. They were going to go out there and spray them basically like a paste, a glue, like a food. And the bats would basically lick themselves and lick their little mates, and they would get inoculated that way. That's the traditional way of vaccinating animals in the wild. I don't know if they do it in Europe. I believe they do chicken heads or something crazy like that. But they drop like vaccines out of the back of helicopters and airplanes here in America, and they basically are trying to vaccinate these raccoons, these animals against rabies, which comes from bats, before they infect Fido, the family dog. So there's tons of little animal vaccine treats that are being, at least thrown out of the back of planes and all that here in America. And the idea in 2018 was that DARPA, this little nimble agency within the giant Department of Defense, the Pentagon here in America, wanted to do self-spreading vaccines, transmissible vaccines in particular is what they're really interested in. And Ralph Barrick and Peter Daszak didn't bid that. They kind of bid a more expensive one, and they're $14 million. Whereas this guy, Vincent Munster, who's on a competing team, ironically, even though they're colleagues, they're kind of competing in this case, is done a cheaper one, half the price, like $8 million for this transmissible vaccine. And his technology is just going to be injected into one bat and spread autonomously to the next. And so that's the one DARPA chose. And so DARPA, through 2 of their 5 winning projects at this Rocky Mount lab, Fauci's Biodefense Lab, is winning these risky research projects from DARPA. It's a really weird biodefense world once you get into it. So in 2019, they get the band back together. Ralph Barrick and Peter Daszak and Vincent Munster get together. And you can see this in the latest email drops by the Drastic Group. They did a great thing where they reached into Peter Daszak's emails, his Gmail account, basically, with full, aware of what was going on. He unknowingly posted a link to his G Drive in their Google Drive, and they pulled out the emails and they shared them with me. And I was able to look at them. You can see what they've done. They've now, Barrick, Munster, and Fauci has brought them all together under one new group called CREED is what they call it. It was just repackaged. The whole DARPA package was repackaged under Fauci's umbrella. So Fauci's got a $6 billion budget. DARPA of the Department of Defense only had $3 billion. So they had more money to spend. They always did. So if you listen to the lab leaker claim, it's that Fauci funded this thing in Wuhan and it got out accidentally. Now, that's biologically impossible for anyone like Shi Zhengli to have created the SARS-2 genome, or anyone to have aerosolized the agent like Vincent Munster. It's just impossible. It's genetically impossible. It's biologically impossible. That's actually good news, because now we can prove the lab leak. You asked me if anyone's going to get away with this. I think they all do, but at least history, I think, will be kindly to this theory, which is basically answering a question. Why does the old world virus called SARS-CoV-2, old world, Eastern Hemisphere, your side of the earth, why does it love New World lab animals, Western Hemisphere lab animals? That was the only thing I was asking. And I've asked every virologist. I've asked Tony Fauci's bosses, Larry Tabak, his lieutenants, Michael Lauer, all these people at NIH in Washington, D.C. I've asked the DARPA guy, Jim Gimlet, prove me wrong. And they will not. I'm not trying to be mean or pugnacious about it. I was very nice, courteous, and professional. Please provide a biological explanation for why this old world virus, SARS-CoV-2, loves New World lab animals. And I gave them the list that I've already gone through. And it's in my mind, the smoking gun, essentially. This thing was created in a U.S. lab and shipped off to Wuhan for testing, where it got out accidentally.
Yeah, because there was also a lab that was out of the focus, let's say, which is the lab on which was working Daniel Anderson that you just said, right? The lab, the BSL-4 in Wuhan as well, right? So these were more connected to Rocky. How you say? Sorry, the
Rocky Mountain Lab is also BSL-4.
Rocky Mountain Lab. Yeah.
Give them credit. They're doing the risky research in the BSL-4. That's the spacesuit. They have those big old giant inflatable spacesuits, and they go into a negative pressure room, and that's where they're doing this. I mean, they did do the experiment right, but it was just made so contagious, so airborne. It was bound to leak. And yes, about 20 or 30 kilometers south of Shi Zhengli's BSL-2 lab, which is in downtown Wuhan, the city center, is a very remote BSL-4. It's essentially the one on the cover of my book. It's that big building you've seen basically every time you read a lab leak story. They showed a picture of the BSL-4. It's not in downtown. It's in a remote area, a suburb of Wuhan. And inside that BSL-4, it's new. It's in operation since 2018. Is a Westerner, a white woman, and her name's Danielle Anderson. And her story just, I took it when the media finally caught up to her. Give the media credit. What were you doing in there? And she goes, I was working on Ebola. And this is like June or July of 2021. And, she's on CNN, like is the American, news cable here in America. And she's on CNN with Ralph Barrick in September 19th of 2021. And both her and Ralph Barrick are cut together, and they're both pointing at Shi Zhengli's BSL-2. 2 days later, the DARPA diffuse document leaks. Essentially, Drastic publishes it, and right there next to Ralph Barrick's name is Danielle Anderson. That was the first name I saw in September of 2021. And I remember her cover story being Ebola, and I myself took that. But you go and look at her resume, her CV. it's long, but none of it involves Ebola. And there's a lot of coronavirus towards the end there. And she's
Yeah.
collaborating with Ralph Barrick and Linfa Wong on coronaviruses, publishing papers. And obviously right there, she was supposed to do the experiment on bats, live bats in the Wuhan BSL-4. And that's what she was doing. So she lied to us. I don't really feel bad about her because it's not her fault. I mean, this thing is so transmissible, so airborne. It was bound to leak. It was bound to get out. It's just, she's just kind of the victim in my mind, but she did lie to us. So I contend she's patient zero. Her boss resigned on January 10th, 2020. She had an antibody test that she will not release. I'm not blaming her for the pandemic. I mean, this thing would have got out, if it was a BSL-5 or a BSL-6. So, the Spanish scientists did it on an island. That's probably where they really needed to be, out there, like some remote island, if they wanted to actually do this, even though they, if there's one thing I want them to stop, quit the madness. They're still doing this kind of risky research. They're just business as usual. But yes, that's Danielle Anderson, who I openly contend is, I don't want to blame her. I do name her because it's a good place to start. She's in Wuhan. She lied about what she was doing. Her boss resigned on January 10th, 2020. She's right there with Ralph Barrick doing these kind of risky experiments on bats. And she's a closer colleague of Barrick than she is of Xizeng Li. I mean, she's a Western.
Well, there's also, just guessing, right? But when you probably are aware of the anthrax crisis, right? So at the beginning it was Al-Qaeda. And then, the Al-Qaeda story was weak. Many scientists and researchers started to point out.
Saddam Hussein who did it, at one point. Yeah, I mean, it was the Iraq guy. We got to go in there and topple them now.
Exactly. So they started to look for a villain, and they had one first, but it was a weak villain as well. So they decided to point out another one, and at the end they pointed out a third one, and this guy appeared dead suddenly, which was
Bruce
very
Ivins.
Convenient.
Yeah.
Was very convenient, but in the end, because there are other characters, but my question is, because all these scientists were working on this chimeric viruses and all of this, but many people in the Pentagon was aware of what was going on. So probably many different scientists had access to same samples, to same technology. It wasn't maybe that close the group. I mean, who knew about all these things. So what is, from your point of view, what is the possibility of this outbreaks, not only COVID-19, but other outbreaks could have been intended, like intentional from the very beginning?
Anthrax was one. It's the best example that you have, but that's a bacteria, not a virus. I would contend that most, viruses, probably have been natural. SARS-1 was natural, I believe. MERS was natural. What are some others? Marburg. That's actually an unnatural one. Marburg has nothing to do with Germany, but that's the town name because that's where it leaked from, a lab in Germany. So the Marburg virus was a lab leak in Marburg, Germany. Marburg is a virus from Africa, and they had the chimpanzees, I guess, being shipped from Africa to Marburg, Germany, and it was I can't remember the details of it, but it was a lab origin. There was the 1977 flu. A lot of people think that was a lab origin, whether it was in China or Russia, who knows? Because it was an old strain from the 50s that suddenly emerged in the 70s.
Yeah.
Something similar has occurred, obviously, with ASF, African swine fever.
Yes, the 2007
is a 2007 strain that more or less has like almost no deviation from this 2000. What year are we in? 2025, and essentially, it's like it's been frozen in somebody's freezer somewhere in some lab at some point in time. So whenever you don't see a natural mutation from one year to the next, it's usually safe to assume there's some sort of lab manipulation. So that's the best example. It happens, in my opinion. Lab leaks are a daily occurrence. Like literally, someone somewhere, a technician or an animal has gotten out, or someone's gotten sick. They just don't usually blow up the world. That's what I always thought made SARS-2 so different, COVID-19 so different. It blew up the world. It infected all of us. I mean, everyone was locked down and shut down within weeks. The world was locked down, for months. We're still talking about it, at least I am, and others, 5-6 years afterwards. And I always thought that's the question. It's not, a lab leak, it's what leaked. That's kind of the way I started the whole, endeavor on this thing. So I do think SARS-2 is unique, but I do think lab leaks are not unique. I do think they happen like all the time. I think they're just, they're they're so local and they don't spread everywhere and they don't blow up the world. We just don't even talk about them. So,
Yeah,
6 or 7 a year in Spain, I mean, 1 or every 2 months, I'm guessing. I don't know. Some people have worked the numbers and it's a lot more than we like to think about. These things are just, accidents occur and there's a lot of people working on this kind of stuff.
yes, yeah. Well, yeah, that's a possibility. But when you see, well, how the viruses have the ability to target, sensible areas of the economic development of places, like in Spain, for example. We are like pork. We are pork producers, we are egg producers, and especially these two outbreaks happened in probably the two most important areas of our economic development, which is, well, makes it very suspicious, especially when you are aware of how this scientist close to the Asian swine fever outbreak, they were working on a vaccine to vaccinate nature, and you had this IPRA project, which is a vaccine that, well, the clinical trial was planned for half 2026, and now, well, because of the outbreak, they will need to start the trial, not clinical trial, but the trial in nature at the beginning of 2026, which, wow, it makes it really, really convenient as well, right?
Yes, there's well, I don't know what to say about it. I mean, it's these animals don't have like vaccine right groups. They don't have like anti-vax, boards and all that kind of stuff. It's like I was talking about with you, I guess before we went on air, it was, it's easier to vaccinate the animal than it is the human. And so when you look at viruses and vaccinologists and these people, virologists and biologists in particular, they love animals for the reasons that, they don't have rights. They don't really experiment on dogs anymore, but they experiment on cats. It's not easy to experiment on a full-size monkey, but it is easy to experiment on a pig. So these things are in the lab and readily available, and they're pretty much infinite in use. So it makes a good model to develop your vaccine. If you want to publish a paper and get recognition and get a patent on your stuff, it's not so much the virus that they're creating, it's the vaccine. So that's kind of the important thing to understand here. And I think if we just all admit that the virus was the vaccine, it kind of changes this whole debate completely. Now, I will admit, it's not like, the best vaccine for humans, but it was a vaccine. It was an animal vaccine. And so that's just to get people over the hump on this whole thing. That's the only thing you have to understand, that, something designed for an animal can jump species in a lab into us humans. So if you want to put the brakes on this kind of risky research, I think it's to talk about where SARS-CoV-2 came from. And then stuff like African swine fever, we probably don't even talk about that unless we had SARS-CoV-2 as an event to kind of prime our minds towards these lab leaks. I never really thought about it much. Did you? About labs and lab leaks and viruses before COVID?
Well, because of movies, probably. Yeah,
Oh,
I've seen Contagion, and
that's a good
I
one.
remember in Spanish we call it Misión Imposible. Is it Mission Accomplished or something like that, or Impossible Mission or something like
That's
that?
Tom Cruise. That
Tom
sounds about right.
Cruise,
Yeah,
exactly. So the
that's
first
right. One
one,
of those episodes had one on
yeah.
viruses.
So they had a
Forgot about
virus
that.
called Chimera, right? So I mean, yeah. Well,
It does make good sci-fi Hollywood stuff.
yes. Another interesting character I was mentioning him before, which is Jeremy Farrar, which um, he's being, well, warned, a word with the role of scientific chief of the World Health Organization, which is, well, interesting. And this guy was, I mean, part of the World Foundation, which has a massive role in the development of drugs against AIDS, right? The AZT, that one. And yeah, this guy has been really, really busy in the last 25 years, let's say, because he was, well, part of the research on SARS, and he's been involved in many different things. And in his book Spike, uh, he admits many suspicious things, like he was using burner phones. I mean, Do you agree on Jeremy Farrar being the, let's say, the coordinator of the whole cover up, or not really?
Yeah, I used to. I was right there. I thought he was so suspicious. I looked into him very deeply. You know, he lived in Vietnam. He was heavily involved in the SARS-1 outbreak because he was in the area in Asia back in 2003. The burner phone, you know, is very suspicious. You know, he said it was 50-50 lab leak on the formal emails. Don't worry, he's up there. But it's a bit of a 180 of recent. So Ralph Barrett finally testified in 2024. So this is the only, after DARPA Diffuse leaked and him and Daniel Anderson appeared next to each other on CNN, they went radio quiet. That was the last interview they ever gave in September 2021. Ralph Barrett and Daniel Anderson just completely disappear from the media. And they Ralph Barrett did under subpoena or threat of it in 2024. He admitted that Tony Fauci invited him to the February 1st, 2020 teleconference. No one's talking about this. I cannot get a U.S. journalist to touch the story. This changes everything. A lot of lab leakers liked Ralph Barrett because they thought he was some truth seeker on the sidelines, not heavily involved in the cover-up of the proximal origin. It turned out that Tony Fauci, after receiving the email from Christian Anderson and Jeremy Farrar that this thing looks engineered and we're nervous, Fauci said he would call the FBI, but instead he picked up the phone and he called Ralph Barrett and he goes, "We got to shut these people up." Basically, I'm paraphrasing essentially because we don't have the recorded message between Ralph Barrett and Tony Fauci. But Tony Fauci said he would call the FBI. Don't worry, Christian Anderson. Don't worry, Jeremy Farrar. Jeremy Farrar, to his credit, notified MI5. MI6, whichever one is the FBI, he did notify them, and he did notify them after the call. And Fauci, on his side, said he would notify the FBI, which is the U.S. version of MI5, and he didn't. He called Ralph Barrett, and he held Ralph Barrett to secretly listen to Christian Anderson's evidence of a lab leak, and that evidence was Xi Jinping's RATG13 making this furin cleavage site stick out like a sore thumb, and Ralph Barrett quietly listening right there with Tony Fauci, because he admitted it. And I don't know why. I think he thought it was public record, or if he's got this idea that if I go down, Fauci's going to go down with me. So to answer your question, Carlos, I used to think Farrar was guilty, but Farrar did not invite Barrett. He made sure he didn't invite Ralph Barrett because they knew that Ralph Barrett was involved with risky research of this one instance of virology. He would have a conflict of interest. So I give Farrar credit for that. He did his part. So he does look suspicious, but the cover-up was mainly Fauci. On his side, he's invited Barrett to listen into the evidence. Then 2 days later, Fauci sets up a follow-up teleconference on February 3rd on the U.S. side. This involves the White House, the CIA, the FBI, all the other U.S. intel agencies. And there, Ralph Barrett ambushes Christian Anderson, and he attacks him. Attacks was the word that Christian Anderson used in front of everybody. It was such a big event. I've had another person that wasn't there heard about it. He heard about it. It was such a kerfuffle. It was such an argument that it was reported basically in everyone's mind at the time. And Ralph Barrett now, who proposed to insert the furin cleavage site in a SARS-2-like virus in 2018, has now attacked Christian Anderson for bringing up the furin cleavage site of the SARS-2-like virus. So to me, when that came out, I thought it was just, well, it's obvious what happened, isn't it? I mean, this is
it looks quite obvious. And
I can't get the U.S. media to touch this, Carlos. They don't want to go there. You know what they're all afraid of over here? Libel lawsuits. It's a very litigious society over here. A bunch of lawyers basically that were suing and whatnot. But it's so obvious he did it. I don't think you need to worry about being sued. I mean, I've openly accused Ralph Barrett of doing this for 3 years now. So yeah, to answer your question, I do think Farrar is involved in kind of a white lie kind of thing on his side now. I've asked him to prove me wrong too. Hey, I know you're the World Health Organization guy. I know you read my letter, the 20-page letter that Jeff Stacks and I wrote. I know you read it. Why don't you prove me wrong? They can't. They won't. Their silence is deafening. So yeah. I give him credit for organizing a teleconference to try and get to the bottom of it. He did not invite Ralph Barrett. Ralph Barrett was invited by Tony Fauci, and that to me seals the deal. Fauci has funded Ralph Barrett's research. They all know it's leaked from the Wuhan lab, and they're going to cover it up in any devious means possible. It's a very dirty background. These are alphas basically, they want to compete in the room, and they just basically insult each other, because they can't really do anything else besides insult and intimidate. It's a very weird world. These scientists and virologists in particular, it's a very niche industry. It's really hard to crack it, and it's not a really comfortable subject to talk about. I mean, who engineers viruses? It's disgusting to even think about. You don't talk about a dinner room table, but Ralph Barrett does. And the U.S. government, to their credit, turned to Ralph Barrett early in the pandemic. They asked him, "Is it engineered?" And he goes, "No, absolutely no evidence of engineering."
Well, that's something also, because you were saying that no one is covering the whole story, but there was one part of the story that was pretty useful in terms of politics, which is, yeah, pointed at China, right? So that's something that Trump did very efficiently. So I think most of the, yeah, the lab leakers community, let's say, really think that it was, well, something that was engineered by China to use it as a, well, warfare type of
Bioweapon, yes.
bioweapon, right? And
I too thought that, Carlos. I was with them on that. I thought it was a bioweapon in August of 2021. That's before DARPA diffused leak. Why? It was immune evasion. This asymptomatic spread of SARS-CoV-2, this ability to spread it without actually, knowing you have it, was a tattletale sign for engineering and a nefarious way to engineer. Who on earth would engineer in immune evasion, a virus that evades your immune system so you don't sneeze or cough? You actually look and feel quite normal. If you're healthy, SARS-CoV-2 does not really infect or affect you that much, essentially. But immune evasion was a feature that really put a lot of people on the bioweapon warpath. Only military-grade technology would train it to evade your immune system, was the thought. And I too thought that. But that was the beauty of the guy that leaked DARPA Diffuse. And he's my Chapter 7 hero, Major Joseph Murphy. He went in there. He's a DARPA fellow. He's part of the DARPA team. He's the only one that knew what this thing was. He goes, immune evasion doesn't mean military grade. It means vaccine grade. That was the key he threw out there. That means that the creator of this thing is so well done. He wants to evade the immune system of the actual mammalian species he's targeting, because a good vaccine doesn't create symptoms, to paraphrase Major Murphy. And so that was what flipped my switch on in October or August of 2021. I think it's a bioweapon. By September, I'm thinking, is it a bat vaccine? In January 2022, Major Murphy's own letter leaked to the Department of Defense, the Inspector General, and he said, yeah, immune evasion is the telltale sign of an actual animal vaccine. So what do they use self-spreading vaccines for? Why do they want immune evasion? So you keep spreading and shedding. That is the telltale sign of a self-spreading vaccine, immune evasion, asymptomatic spread. And you can find that in all their literature. They're talking about asymptomatic spread actually being some sort of moral hazard in their design, and they'll work around it with superinfection, which means reinfection. They were talking about super spreader events. These are vaccinologists in 2019 studying self-spreading vaccines. They were talking about super spreader events in 2019. You'll find this in the literature. From like 2015 to 2019, there's just this steady increase of self-spreading vaccine work. And all this was done by a German postdoc named Guy Reeves at the Max Planck Institute. I just piggybacked off his work. So there's a Major Murphy in Chapter 7. There's a Guy Reeves back there in Chapter 27, 28, where I kind of, get a little more detailed than I think we all want to hear about. But these two guys, in my opinion, they won't talk to me, but they're the ones that kind of figured it out without me having to do much work or effort on this thing. So that was another sign. I'll just summarize it. Immune evasion, asymptomatic spread. Myself, I thought it was a bioweapon. I did too, because that was the only answer for that. But then Murphy's letter leak, and he goes, animal vaccine. And it clicked like a ton of bricks, because I knew Barrick had studied immune evasion. He calls it ORF8, Open Reading Frame 8. That was basically one of his many points of the genome that he researched, basically, was immune evasion. And it sounds icky, and it probably is, but it's when you design a vaccine for animals, you don't want it to sicken the animal. But you do want it to inoculate it, and you do that with immune evasion.
Yes, and but there's another patent that also could bring some light onto this, which was the patent related to the HQU3, right? And when Barrick refused to show the information about this, and it looks like, no one is forcing him to release that information. So do you think that this HQU3 will be the smoking gun, the real smoking gun, the real evidence of the lab engineered origin of this SARS-CoV-2?
Yeah, it's so crazy. It's hard for people to contemplate. I myself didn't figure that out, by the way. A virologist told me, and I said, I knew you were smarter than me. I didn't know you were that much smarter than me. She goes, someone told me, and I have an inkling of an idea of who did that. Maybe someone on the February 1st call. Anyways, a lot of the stuff has been handed. A lot of this stuff's been handed to me. I don't want to sound like I've gone out there and just pulled it out. Someone told me about it. I could not figure it out. But anyways, yes. U.S. Right to Know published Barrick's notes. And they had to go to the United States Geological Service, which overlooks the bat caves here in America, to get to the UNC records in North Carolina. The guy's not giving up anything, but inside those notes was this reference to something called HKU3 SMIX. And everyone's like, what the hell is that? And he described it as a genome that's 20% different than SARS-1. Guess what SARS-2 is? 20% different. Then you go even more further into the weeds. He says the spike protein of HKU3S mix is 25% different than SARS-1. Guess what SARS-2 is? 24.7.
Wow.
I mean, yeah.
It's almost the same thing.
This is a 2018 patent by Ralph Baric. Ralph Baric has patented the SARS-CoV-2 genome in 2018. I thought at that point we'd all be done, but that came out a couple of years ago, and everyone else was like, "Oh, she's English." Oh, give me a break. This is our smoking gun of smoking guns right here. In 2018, once you know what to look for, HKU3S mix, you're looking at the SARS-2 genome on Ralph Baric's paperwork, documents, presentations, slides. It's called Group 1A. Then there's Group 1A, 1C. This is a Group 2. Which is what SARS-2 is. And it was a new branch in the coronavirus tree, and no one had seen anything like it before. But Ralph Baric's patent has a tree limb pointing right in the same direction as this new SARS-CoV-2 tree limb. So that's a 2018 patent, has this little branch in the coronavirus tree showing you where SARS-CoV-2 is going to eventually emerge. Whenever you create a vaccine, it has to be a novel chimera. It needs to be a new one. In other words, in order to inoculate effectively. They're getting a little into the weeds, even above my head. But essentially, you can't take an existing genome and turn it into a vaccine. You got to have a new one, something nature's never seen before. It's a better antigen. It's a better, train, I guess, to deliver the antigen, to deliver the vaccine. So it's something new and novel, a novel chimera, this combination of several viruses from Asia and Southeast Asia and China that he's combined into this novel thing called HKU3S mix. And yeah, Ralph Baric patented it in 2018. He patented the SARS-2 genome. That's you can patent, genomes, and the SARS-2 genome was
which is kind of crazy, right? Because if it
so
comes
bizarre.
from nature is how can you patent nature? This is a crazy idea for me. That I'm probably, because I'm not a virologist, so maybe this makes.
I don't think any of us do. You could do that, but he did. I think it's because it's new. I don't know, to be honest with you, Carlos. I'm just thinking out loud, but because it's new, he's not
creation. Yeah,
right.
Because you're creating it.
He's created it. It's a man-made, artificial genome, and so he can patent it. I guess if he went out there and tried to patent RATG13 or SARS-1, he can't do that. But if he patents something in between those two, which is what he did, then maybe, I guess, in America, you can almost patent anything, apparently. But this is essentially what they do. You could just put your name on these things. And that's what Ralph Baric did. He put his name on the SARS-2 genome in 2018. Again, it's so funny once you get your brain around it. And just understand, though, it is an accident, but he did create it with intent. That furin cleavage site was inserted with intent. He was trying to infect bats.
He actually said that, right? When he was asked in the Senate, in a private, well, not private, but not public, in his declaration, he said that, like, he was interested on finding out why there was no sarbecovirus with this kind of furin cleavage site. So I mean, it's a confession. It's like, I'm looking for that specifically, right? So
yes.
What
picked up on that in
his
testimony. He said he was obsessed with furin cleavage sites and why they did not exist in sarbecoviruses. Now we have a sarbecovirus, SARS-CoV-2, with a furin cleavage site. Thanks to you, Ralph.
Exactly.
I mean, you know what his excuse was? It's a shortcut to growing a synthesized fake virus in his lab. So it's kind of like a little, we'll call it like a little, sugar cube you put in the middle of this virus genome in order to kind of just amplify its growth rate. And so now he can grow these synthesized fake, for lack of a better word, viruses and turn them into real ones with the furin cleavage site, and allows them to grow in culture. And this is another point that separates Ralph Baric from Shizheng Li. Shizheng Li used viro cells, monkey cells. They delete the furin cleavage site. Ralph Baric uses human airway epithelial cells because he has a lung department at the University of North Carolina where they do these lung research, lung transplants. They take the discarded lung, or what's not needed, and they put it into the recycle bin for Ralph Baric to grow it in Petri dish. So basically, Baric can replicate your human airway cells from your throat, hair follicles and all, inside of a Petri dish, and it's called human airway epithelial cells. The SARS-CoV-2 furin cleavage site is preserved in those cells. It does not delete them. So that was another big clue that separated Shizheng Li's low-tech research, deletes the furin cleavage site, versus Ralph Baric's high-tech research. It preserves the furin cleavage site.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the last question, because we are almost running out of time, but this is my last question because, apparently Shizheng Li became the inadvertent hero of the whole story. And when she published the RATG13 paper, there was a plan of delivering Citizen Lee to justice. Is it? And do you what do you think that happened in between? That was kind of, I don't know, any kind of deal with them or not?
I don't know. To be honest with you, I can't get it. I've asked her point blank, I think you're a hero for publishing it. Why'd you do it? And she'll never say. I believe she's just, it's a CYA move, cover my ass. I believe that to be true. She was very fierce in denial early on in the pandemic. Not my lab, not my lab. And I think she's getting in a fight with Ralph Baric. Ralph Baric wanted her arrested for publishing RATG13. That came out in a private Slack message. She could be arrested is what he used. So the Chinese Communist Party never arrested her. She's not a member of the Chinese Communist Party. She's not a member of the Beijing regime. She is a fierce individual person, and she's pretty much a free person still. But Ralph Baric was the one that wanted her arrested. I believe what happened is she shared it with him in an email, just like she shared other pathogens, and she felt like she got burned. And she said, you know what, I got nothing to hide. I'm going to publish it. And when she did, she basically showed, the world that this thing's engineered, and I didn't engineer it. And it took lab leakers, myself, several years to catch up to that fact. And the only reason I even knew that she didn't do it was DARPA Diffuse leaked, and Ralph Baric's in there saying he'll insert the furin cleavage site into an RATG13 genome, and he never defended himself. So it must have been him that did it, and he must have had a copy of the genome before she published it. So to answer your question, I don't know why she did it. I think she just did try and clear her conscience. But in the process of doing it, she actually turned herself into the number one suspect because she possessed the closest known genome. Ironically, since then, to give her full clearance, the U.S. military, the Pentagon, went into Laos and collected a sample closer than RATG13. It's called Laos Banal. Xi Jinping would not have access to it, but Ralph Baric would. I mean, so the Pentagon was over there digging for bat samples in Laos. That is, the whole crazy side story quest to that whole thing. So I believe she'll go down as everyone's villain, but I believe if you look at it closely, she is the hero. She's one of the two whistleblowers in the book. Xi Jinping and is Major Murphy. When you cross-reference their evidence, I believe you come to a pretty clear conclusion. This thing's a vaccine created in U.S. labs by Ralph Baric and Vincent Munster.
Wow, Dan. Oh, wow, very interesting chat. I could be here forever, but I want also to leave something for the people to read your work, and that's the main point. But I think we summarized quite well. The differences between your research and other researchers. For example, myself, the last article that I wrote about this was like 2 years ago, and obviously I have to, I don't know, recheck my own work because there were many clues that I couldn't see, but now I see them clearly because of your work. I want to thank you because of this, and I think this interview was very, very interesting.
You know more than most, Carlos, with your questions. You are tied into the details. That's impressive because it's a very counterintuitive, complex subject, and it's not an easy thing to grasp that something cooked up in a U.S. lab would emerge in China of all places. But they had to go there to test it because that's where the Chinese horseshoe bats were. It was the only place in the world where you can get to these things, and you'll probably find European scientists, like European meaning people like Christian Drosten and Germans that also do coronavirus research. They were also obsessed with these Chinese horseshoe bats. So that's kind of the final punctuation. Why Wuhan? And Xi Jinping had access to these tiny little bats about the size of your fist, and no one else did. That was the only thing she offered. Since then, Fauci wants to build a Chinese bat lab in America, $100 million bat lab, so he doesn't have to test over there in Wuhan. So that was the only reason why Wuhan was a story, and that's essentially kind of the funny coincidence of this whole thing.
Yes. Many coincidences lately,
Yes.
especially here in Spain. So I think Jim will be in touch because we're both researching on the same. Will you be researching on the same in the incoming months, or you want to have a break on this?
I need to take a break from this. I think I've pretty much crossed every T and dotted every I and beat it into the bush as best I can. I mean, after you submit something to the World Health Organization, and their response was weak, Carlos. It was kind of like, that's all you got. They didn't even understand the word chimera. You understand the word chimera. I love that,
Yes.
But they did not understand the word chimera. In their brain, it doesn't even trigger what they thought. They think natural origin recombination. And no, chimera is recombination in the lab. It's called a chimera. You get it. They don't. So, I mean, what more can you do? People are going to believe what they want to believe. I always see this the test of time, essentially will come this way. It's just kind of, there's no one's proven this wrong, as crazy as it sounds. I think it's one of the greatest stories of all time because, the guy that we all turn to for the pandemic, Tony Fauci, was the one that helped create the pandemic in his own backyard, in his own biodefense lab.
Yes. And then there's also something that shocked me a lot, which is, well, as it happened also in anthrax crisis, there was this Operation Dark Winter before that. Well, that was very similar. Then you have Event 201 as well, which is very, very similar as well. And if you go back on time to 2010, you have a dossier from the Rockefeller Foundation on which they were, I don't know, drawing different scenarios for the future. And that was one scenario which was actually exactly the same that the scenario that happened later on. So, well, yeah, from my point of view, this is the story of our times because, well, they twisted everything out, right? The technocracy coup, let's say, started there. Well, not started there, but it was boosted from that very moment, from 2020, and now we're still feeling the consequences of it, right? And well, that makes me freak out because I have children, and well, I don't want them to live in a world on which, well, there are outbreaks all the time, and they can't buy food like natural food or local food because they're afraid of what they eat, they're afraid of what they smell, they're afraid of, I don't want this kind of world. So, well, yeah, I think I'll be researching on this.
Yeah, none of us do, and your writing helps bring attention to it. It's a great international story. These viruses cross borders; they affected all of us. Usually, they're local outbreaks, but this one was truly international, and they're still doing it. That's what makes me mad. In 2025, Princeton University and others are still publishing self-spreading vaccine research. They're getting away with it. That's what's kind of annoying. These little scientists and their little schemes are still doing this kind of risky stuff. So thanks for helping me bring attention to it, because that's no one wants to live in that world. I mean, it's nonsense. It's dangerous.
It's dangerous. It's
reality, to use that economic term. You're not infecting yourself. You're infecting everyone on the planet with this kind of stuff. So it is designed to spread, and it needs to stop.
Yeah, and all under the umbrella of
One Health.
caring. Yeah, One Health. Like we are caring about
that.
nature and what they
Yeah.
at the end, what they're doing.
They want to play God. My editor said, that's essentially what you're dealing with. Scientists that want to play God, preempt the next spillover event, vaccinate the animal before it infects us humans. And that's what they want to do. You're going up against some type A people that really just want to go up there and, get medieval with their kind of research. But yes, that one world, one health kind of idea really fueled a lot of this.
Well, we'll keep on digging on this kind of stuff. And Jim, really, really pleased to have you here, and really honored. And well, your work was enlightening my own. So thank you very much. And I hope to have you soon here, because we'll probably have news about the African swine fever and all this outbreaks in Spain. So. We are in touch now, and I wish you the best.
Thanks for having me for all this. Thanks for reading.
Bye.
Grupo de control. Carlos Sánchez.